Looking at the current state of the Russia-Ukraine war, one naturally asks, how exactly will this war end? We can quickly sketch several scenarios, and among them is the scenario of the collapse of Russia, of Putin. In other words, the scenario in which Russia defeats itself long before Ukraine acquires enough strength to decide the war. At first glance, this may sound like a rather absurd hypothesis. We still see a Putin brimming with enthusiasm and confidence as he asserts his authority across the entire territory of Russia. And beyond Russia's borders, he remains equally confident when criticizing democracy throughout the world.
Говорят, ну, допустим, в той же самой России правоохранители слишком жестко ведут себя в процессе каких-то там акций уличных. А то, что в европейских странах расстреливают резиновыми пулями, глаза выбивают людям, гибнут люди на улицах, водометы применяют слезоточивый газ, это нормально? Вот я разговариваю с одним из своих коллег, партнеров, тоже без имен. Я ему говорю, а там у вас как? Ничего? Это все можно? Значит, речь шла о Беларуси. Он мне отвечает, но мы же демократическая страна. Ну, вы понимаете, это же смешно. Резиновая пуля выбивает глаз. Ну, пострадавшему надо сказать, ну, ничего. Это же демократическая резиновая пуля. Ну, потерпите. Людям же от этого не легче, правда?
Clearly, Putin wants to prove to the world that he can comfortably continue the war that is tearing Ukraine apart because he has more than 140 million obedient people behind him in Russia. Obedient, not necessarily supportive. And in today's Russia, there is no political organization, let alone an individual, capable of becoming Putin's rival and removing him. Russian media ceaselessly amplify this narrative to please Putin. That's why they eagerly report, look, Russia still has protests. Our society is still free to express its attitudes. But what exactly are those protests about? A fairly typical answer. A video posted on November 24th shows hundreds of people in Novosibirsk taking to the streets to protest the killing of stray animals. The crowd chants, Yet right now, in neighboring Ukraine, human beings are being killed en masse, and no one bothers to take to the streets. In 3 years of war, more than 1 million Russians have ended up in the Black Earth, yet not a single protest. But to protect dogs and cats, 200 people are ready to march. Kremlin propaganda has brainwashed the population to the point that the fate of animals has become more important than human lives. A somewhat better-off segment of the urban population at least still talks about peace negotiations. But when asked what peace should look like, they answer, it has to be according to the president's words. Russia must win. Everything has to be exactly as the president says. Some claim lasting peace is only possible when Ukraine stops oppressing Russians and recognizes the territories Russia has seized. We respect Ukrainians. They must respect us too, one man said. Most interviewees dodge politics. Who wants war? But I dare not talk about conditions. Many insist they are not interested in politics and just want peace because they are exhausted by the prolonged war. And the Russian press. For 4 whole years since the war broke out, Russian media have continued to paint a wonderful picture of the situation inside the country. Of course, they are not foolish enough to claim that everything has always been perfect. Rather, from the Kremlin, an implicit general order seems to have been issued to media outlets that want to survive in Russia. Say that even if things are heading in a bad direction, the president will make them wonderful. Take wages, for example. When the publication Moskovsky Komsomolets writes that wages in Russia are collapsing, it means the issue will be blocked thereafter. Rest assured, the president is holding the line. We'll put all that aside. Today, let's not waste time. let's talk straight about one reality. Can the collapse of Putin and Russia happen fast? We can find an answer in the recent admission from Herman Gref, the chairman of Sberbank. He openly said the ruble is very far from its actual value. He stated the fair exchange rate should now be around 100 to 105 rubles for $1. Meanwhile, the current exchange rate is only sitting in the high 70s or low 80s rubles per USD. This signal means the Russian bank might adjust the rate from 80 rubles up to 105 rubles, which is definitely not a small adjustment. That's losing about 34% of the currency's value. This is no longer just market volatility, it's a planned seizure of buying power from all Russian citizens. Inside the Kremlin, this is a serious warning shot. It means the hidden assets, secret accounts, and lavish lifestyles of the elite will have to be sacrificed to pay for the war. And when one group of elites has to pay the price, while another group still holds power, internal court battles become unavoidable. So what consequence does this bring for Putin? On his personal channel, analyst Jason Smart calls this a sign of Putin's economic collapse. Smart's analysis suggests these recent events are a warning sign of the economy collapsing under Putin. He explains that politicians, TV hosts, and frontline generals can all lie to please Putin and save their lives right away. But the only man in Moscow who cannot lie about math is Herman Gref, the one who holds the real numbers. Gref is the longtime chairman of Sberbank, the largest bank and the backbone of Russia's financial system. He also shaped Russia's modern financial architecture and is seen as the barometer for elite worries when the economy shrinks. Therefore, it is an extremely serious, almost shocking event that someone close to the Kremlin like Gref would openly admit the situation is this bad. When the ruble was trading at 78 to 79 rubles per USD, Smart says Gref spoke at a forum saying that rate was very far from balance, and the reasonable level should be around 100 rubles per USD. Gref even offered acceptable forecasts of 100 to 105 rubles, and even worse, 112 to 115 rubles per USD by the end of 2025. Smart points out that the 2025 budget was first made assuming a much stronger ruble, around the mid-90s per USD. But when the ruble temporarily got stronger, hitting the low 80s, tax revenue from oil instantly crashed. This made the finance ministry suddenly lose billions in expected revenue. While Putin can promise stability on TV, Gref is warning that the current economic model can't keep the war going with a strong exchange rate. The balance, he talks about, isn't fair to the people. It's about the regime's survival and the war budget. This is where the elite conflict starts, because TV promises victory, but the finance people know there isn't enough money. So, Smart says, they are forced to rob the middle class. Smart states that Putin is ready to lose tanks, but not ready to lose his bankers. Right now, Russians live with a 70 to 80 ruble rate. If this rate is fake and unsustainable, everything will get much more expensive. If the rate moves to 105 rubles, people will pay 34% more for everything. If it hits 112 rubles, that's an extra 40 to 45%, not including the coming VAT increase. Russia already saw waves of inflation after the 2022 devaluation, and this new devaluation will trigger another one, hitting people who have already cut back all they can. Meanwhile, a weak ruble quietly taxes the elite's foreign assets, like their kids studying abroad, doctor costs, or property overseas. As the money pool shrinks, every budget ruble becomes a weapon in the internal elite fight. Devaluation only makes things worse because imported components and whole cars will cost much more in rubles, and families will keep old cars longer, putting off big purchases. A 34% currency hit increases the pressure, shrinking Putin's room for a long war, even though Smart thinks the tension inside Russia is already much bigger, even if no protests happen tomorrow. The reason Russia's economy is bad is war spending combined with sanctions. Since the full invasion, war spending has exploded to pay mobilized troops, mercenaries, occupation forces, new propaganda, and a denser security apparatus to control the population. It's no longer a special operation, it's a permanent war budget. The main life source, oil and gas, is having serious issues. Sanctions force Moscow to sell at a discount, increasing shipping and insurance costs and shrinking real income. This leaves less room for financial mistakes. Gref describes the current situation as a perfect storm, because high interest rates are needed to curb inflation, but those same rates crush investment and consumer credit, while the ruble is still too highly valued for exporters. According to Smart, the weak ruble is the regime's brutal medicine. Each oil dollar is exchanged for more rubles. This makes the budget look healthier on paper, but in reality, the true living standard will collapse completely. This is a forced choice for the elite. Either feed the war machine with cheaper rubles or protect the currency and let the war budget break. When the money for corruption shrinks, allies start hunting each other. Every time technocrats like Gref speak the truth about the numbers, they expose the gap between propaganda and reality, making the elite's panic grow. Smart argues this won't be a short-term shock. True living standards will keep sliding for years. Inflation will steadily eat away at the cost of food, utilities, and services, making the middle class poorer every day. On top of that, Moscow now completely depends on its relationship with China. Any change in Chinese purchasing could destroy Russia's situation, especially since China has already hiked prices by up to 87% on some critical dual-use goods sold to Russia. A weak ruble will only multiply that price premium. Smart also notes that in the context of this war, such a huge economic shift has another meaning. Every successful strike on a Russian oil refinery or warship hits twice, once on the metal and concrete, and once on the exchange rate and the budget. For the West, what is happening is a chance to conduct economic warfare to ensure Russia can no longer continue the war and won't be able to wage war for many years to come. Inside Russia, many banks are severely illiquid. Smart warns that just one major bank collapse could trigger a system-wide domino effect, a risk that Kremlin think tanks have been writing about for months, warning of chain defaults across all major banks without big changes. He also points out that the low unemployment rate, about 2.2%, sounds good, but it's actually a sign of extremely high inflation, forcing most Russians to find extra work. Smart believes the Russian economy is no longer a real economy. It's just a shell, a war economy, where the government constantly prints money to keep up the appearance that everything is running. Smart concludes that printing more rubles today won't save the situation. It will just make everything much worse. If the ruble starts to collapse and the Putin regime doesn't react quickly enough, which Smart thinks it certainly won't, the war could end very fast, because a day will come when the Kremlin won't have the money to pay its soldiers anymore. Chasen Smart's remarks came at the same time that analyst Yuri Shvets offered similar assessments. In recent years, Yuri Shvets has become a symbol of clear-eyed analysis and shocking revelations about the true state of Russia. A former KGB major who once operated undercover in Washington, he experienced the entire system from the inside. Now, from the United States, he watches the very empire he once served fall apart piece by piece. In his latest comments, Shvets stated bluntly, Putin is repeating the exact mistakes made by Soviet leaders before the collapse of the USSR. Only this time, the stakes are far higher. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Shvets has become one of the most frequently cited analysts in the Russian-speaking world. His words are harsher than those of diplomats or political scholars, yet behind that harsh tone lies the cold calculation of a veteran intelligence officer. He describes Russia in 2025 as an empire that has lost every tool of empire, a weakened military, an economy on the brink of collapse, and an elite stripped of confidence. And at the center of the chaos is Vladimir Putin, whom Shvets portrays not as a master strategist, but as a hostage to the very illusions he created. According to Shvets, Putin is living in a virtual reality created by Russia's own intelligence agencies. He receives no honest reports, sees nothing of the real situation on the battlefield, and has no grasp of the economic reality. Back in the KGB, we had a saying, never deliver bad news if you want to live past today. That motto is now running the entire country. He insists that the current crisis did not begin with the war, but long before, at the moment the government stopped believing in itself. When every decision is driven by fear instead of analysis, and when truth becomes a threat. I watched the Soviet Union collapse from the inside. Everything still looked intact, the military, the party, the KGB, and then within 6 months it all fell apart. The same thing is happening now, he said. Putin is being defeated by his own inner circle. No one wants to go down with him. History is repeating itself, only at a much faster pace. Shvets argues that Putin's fate is not being decided by the West, but by his own system eating itself from within. He compares the current regime to a mafia organization. Everyone fears each other, and the closer they get to defeat, the greater that fear becomes. Putin isn't losing to Ukraine, he's losing to the people around him. No one is willing to die for him anymore. He explains that any dictatorship destroys itself the moment it stops believing in its own myth. Today, the Kremlin no longer believes in victory. It only believes it can hide defeat. But history doesn't allow concealment. It arrives suddenly and ruthlessly. Shvets describes the Kremlin's vertical information system as its fatal weakness. Officials are afraid to speak the truth. Generals sugarcoat their reports. And Putin lives inside a scripted illusion of success of his own making. A state that replaces reality with television cannot win a war, he concludes. I don't know the exact day Putin's system will collapse, but I know one thing for certain. The process has already begun, and it cannot be reversed. The analyst insists he is not selling cheap hope. He is offering understanding. And that understanding, he says, is more frightening to the Kremlin than any sanctions, because it destroys their myth faster than bombs. Shvets believes Russia now stands at a threshold identical to the final days of the Soviet Union, except this time there is no Gorbachev, no reform, no peaceful transition. Only scorched ground, a disillusioned elite, and a society with nothing left to believe in. That, he warns, is what makes the current situation extremely dangerous. When ideology dies, chaos rushes in, and Russia has never emerged from chaos without bloodshed. He claims that a covert civil war has already begun inside the Kremlin. Power factions, the military, the FSB, the National Guard, and others are fighting for resources and influence. None of them are willing to die for Putin anymore. And that, he says, is the death sentence. Shvets outlines 3 possible scenarios. A palace coup, the most likely. Putin will be removed by his own inner circle under the banner of saving the country. Most 20th century dictatorships ended this way. A controlled transition. The Kremlin attempts a smooth leadership change, but Shvets argues this is impossible because fear is not something anyone wants to inherit. Or a chaotic collapse like in 1991, the most dangerous but also the most realistic if the elite continues to prioritize self-preservation. Whichever scenario unfolds, Shvets says there will be no returning to the old Russia. The country has changed irreversibly. He believes that after this war, Europe will also be fundamentally different, no longer just an economic union, but a union of shared values where security and morality are inseparable. Ukraine has restored for Europe the true meaning of freedom. For the first time in decades, Europe understands that freedom is something worth dying for. A new order is emerging before our eyes. From the Baltics to the Black Sea, a new axis of power grounded in responsibility rather than fear is being forged. Poland, the Baltic states, Scandinavia, Romania, Slovakia. They are becoming the core of a new Europe, resolute, battle-ready, and mature. Ukraine will be the key pillar of this new structure. It is not only defending itself, but inspiring, training, and uniting the entire continent. The Ukrainian military is more than an armed force. It is a school where the world is learning how to defeat a dictatorship. Shvets believes Ukraine's entry into NATO and the EU is only a matter of time, and it will happen faster than anyone predicts because Ukraine has paid a price no other nation was willing to pay. He concludes, Putin wanted to become Peter the Great, but history is turning him into the last czar of an empire no one cares to save.